Hello and welcome to Bread and Roses, the channel where we talk about capitalism, and understanding why it sucks. Now, one of the things that a lot of people get confused about with capitalism is they think that it's synonymous with the market. Although the market is a feature of capitalism, there are other economic systems that also have a market. So this is not the defining feature of capitalism. The essence of capitalism can really be boiled down to production for profit and labor for wages. So this point is expressed in the book Economics for Everyone by the heterodox economist Jim Stanford, and I'm just going to read to you a short excerpt where he talks about this exact point. Capitalism and markets. Even when economists bother to name the economy they are studying, they usually use a euphemism instead of the C word. They don't call it capitalism. They call it a market economy. This implies that what is unique about capitalism is its reliance on markets and market signals, like supply, demand, and prices, to organize the economy. But that is wrong too. Markets of various kinds do indeed play a major role in capitalism. A market is simply a place where various buyers and sellers meet to haggle over price and agree on sales of a good, a service, or an asset. And by place, I do not mean that a market has to have an actual physical location. It just needs to provide a way in which buyers and sellers can communicate and strike deals. In the internet era, markets can exist in cyberspace, not just a community hall or stock exchange. But capitalism is not the only economic system which relies on markets. Pre-capitalist economies also had markets, where producers could sell excess supplies of agricultural goods or handicrafts, and where exotic commodities like spices or fabrics from far-off lands could be purchased. Most forms of socialism also rely heavily on markets to distribute end products, and even in some cases to organize investment and production. So markets are not unique to capitalism, and there is nothing inherently capitalist about a market. Okay, I'm just going to interject for a moment. So I would say that Jim Stanford is probably correct to point out that socialism, or many forms of socialism, have relied heavily on markets. But it's just important to distinguish between socialism and communism. A communist society would not have a market, would also not have a state, would not have money, and so on. Now, with socialism, the definition of socialism is contested, so it really depends on how you're defining it. There are those who would argue that socialism inherently does not have a market. And, I think there is some validity to that argument. It's definitely worth considering. But even outside of any sort of state socialist project that has existed or exists, countries that define themselves and are often defined by others as socialist, even when you look at revolutions like the Spanish Revolution, the early Russian Revolution in 1917 between February and October, when there was sort of this worker-controlled socialism, grassroots, bottom-up socialism. And the Spanish Revolution, by the way, 1936 to 39, if you want to look that up. That even in those cases, there was still a market, even though workers were in control and they were forming mutual aid networks and so on to try to, especially in the Spanish Revolution, this developed quite a lot more deeply than it has in other revolutions, trying to sort of get away from the market as much as possible and create more forms of solidarity-based exchange, which is different than bartering, by the way. So that's just a little tangent. Anyways, back to reading from Jim Stanford. So just as important, there are many aspects of modern capitalism that have nothing to do with markets. Within large companies, for example, very few decisions are made through market mechanisms. Instead, relationships of command, control, and plan reign supreme. Remember, some corporations are economically larger than many countries, so these internal non-market relationships are important. And there are other ways in which capitalism reflects powerful non-market forces and motivations, like tradition, habit, politeness, reciprocity, altruism, coercion, and sometimes brute force. So capitalism is not a market economy. Capitalism is a system in which most production occurs for private profit and most work is performed by wage labor. Okay, now I'm going to read an excerpt from the book Promises Not Kept by John Isbister, pages 33 to 34. The term capital is used in diverse ways by different groups of people. In common parlance, capital is often synonymous with money, as when a broker says, "I have some capital to invest in the stock market." But this is not how the word is used by modern social scientists. For mainstream economists, often called neoclassical economists, capital is a means of production, that is, something that is used in the production of other things. To distinguish it from other means of production, such as land and labor, the term capital is reserved for those means of production that have themselves been previously produced. Included in capital are factories, machines, and tools that have been produced at some prior time and are currently used for making goods or producing services. Capital can include highways, trucks, harbors, airplanes, and even inventories. Natural resources, such as deposits of iron ore, are not considered capital because they have not been produced. For mainstream economists, capitalism is the social system under which this capital is privately owned. Sorry, let me just interject for a moment. Now, again, these, as the author mentioned, these definitions are contested, and we're just talking about the neoclassical definition right now. For mainstream economists, capitalism is the social system under which this capital is privately owned. At the center of this view of capitalism is the market, the institution in which sellers and buyers come together on a voluntary basis. Sorry, gotta interject again. Voluntary should be in big quotation marks because of the way that our choices are constrained and manipulated by the forces of inequality and the way just capitalism pushes us into certain positions in life, what we're born into, and all sorts of circumstances that really limit our choices. So this is more of a philosophical issue of what is considered voluntary. So back to the excerpt. Privately owned capital is used to produce goods and services, which in turn are sold in markets at prices that are determined through the interplay of supply and demand. Included in this view of capitalism is an important role for the government. Earlier generations in Europe and North America, influenced by the laissez-faire ideas of Adam Smith and his followers, may have argued that government was a threat to capitalism, but in the modern world, it is clear that government are central planners. It is clear that governments are central partners in most capitalist systems. In Britain and the United States, for example, about 1/3 of the goods and services produced are paid for by governments at all levels. Governments in capitalist countries built the infrastructure, the roads, airports, waterways, educational systems, etc., that is needed to maintain the system. They provide for the military, they regulate the private sector through a series of rules, subsidies, price controls, and oversight agencies, and they patch up the loose ends of the system with welfare programs. In the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was a danger that the capitalist societies of North America and Europe would collapse because of their own rigidity. They were saved by the Second World War and then by government economic policies in the development of public welfare programs. Governments in the capitalist countries learned to spend, tax, regulate, legislate, and produce in ways that supported the capitalist system and that compensated for its unevenness and shortcomings. Capitalism today in no way implies the absence of government activity. What it implies is that government supports the system of private ownership of the nation's productive capacity. Okay, so that's where we're going to leave it for today, and tomorrow I'll be back with another video about capitalism, And as the days continue to come, we will have even more videos about understanding capitalism and understanding why it sucks. So, subscribe if you'd like to see those videos. Click the bell if you want to be notified to make sure you don't miss them. And also, if you liked this video, give it a like, and also leave a comment letting me know what you thought. Whether you liked the video or not doesn't matter. Just tell me what, go ahead and, you can tell me off in the comments. I don't care. I got a thick skin. And, or at least I pretend to on the internet. I don't want anyone to see my pain. And yeah, so thank you for watching, listening, and I'll see you next time.